All right, folks. One of the problems that we're experiencing, of course, is global warming. I like to refer to it as climate change. There's widespread agreement among scientists that global warming is now unequivocally here. As I mentioned earlier, the 10 warmest years on record from 1880 through 2014 have all happened since 1999. Not only do scientists believe that global warming or climate change is a reality, they also believe that there's very high confidence that human activities have contributed to the warming. Might not be the only reason, but we are not helping things, folks. We are certainly aggravating the processes and much to our own demise. And we know that much of our actions come from the release of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. This is the biggest and best known culprit, which is ultimately leading to the greenhouse effect, where sunlight is making it through our atmosphere and then getting trapped here on Earth, and it's not able to escape back into space. And much like the effect of your car heating up in on a summer afternoon, you're driving around, air conditioner's running, feels great. You get out of your car, you turn it off, you're gone for an hour and a half, you come back and it's blazing hot in your car. It's because heat is entering into your car through your windows and it's not escaping fast enough and it heats up the inside of your car. That's essentially what's happening with global warming here on our world as well. This is one of the impacts of global warming, global mean sea level change. As you see, it's going up. Many of the charts that we see in reference to climate change are going up. Heat going up, sea level changes going up, occurrences of severe weather events going up, forest fires going up. Some other global warming impacts, some ecological disruptions. Coral reefs are on record levels for dieback. This is going to create some problems for reef stability, island stability, food supply stability. We're seeing increases in wildfires. I live in the West, and this phenomenon has been going on quite a bit over the last 15 years, and we just saw massive wildfires in California and Montana. And of course, species extinction. Agriculture is experiencing problems due to climate change, drought in some regions, too much rain in other regions, and then of course, this is creating changing soil profiles that are making agricultural yields less productive than they have been in the past. And then, of course, climate's creating its own set of human crises as well. Heat waves, increased natural disasters, and the increase in diseases and health problems. We're seeing tuberculosis coming back. We're seeing malaria coming back. We're seeing pneumonia, smallpox. Many of the diseases that we have been very effective in controlling through modern medicine are now starting to resurface again. As I mentioned, ozone is a problem and it's a solution. So upper atmosphere ozone is good. it protects human health and life from UV radiation. So in one respect, we're dealing with a depletion of upper ozone, which we've talked about earlier. We controlled CFCs, and that in turn is creating some at least slowing of the ozone holes. And then there's by not having enough ozone in the atmosphere, you of course increase levels of UV radiation, and we are seeing cancer rates increase. And then of course there's ground level ozone, which forms when sunlight glares down and reacts with fossil fuel combustion, creating dangerous smog. This is a cancer forming as well, respiratory problems, premature death, the whole 9 yards. We talked about this a little bit earlier as well. I also talked about particulates and acid rain. Large urban areas face hazards of particulates in the air, which ultimately penetrate deeply into lung tissue and cause breathing problems. Asthma is on the rise in urban environments. 2006 study found that over 160,000 Americans die prematurely each year due to fine particulates being clogged in their lung tissue. And then, of course, pollutants combine with water and atmosphere to acidify rain, resulting in direct damage to plant tissue, leaching of nutrients from the soil, and acidification of lake waters affecting most wildlife. So the biotic community is certainly suffering due to these things that humans are now injecting into the environment. And of course, we are part of that environment, whether we want to accept that or not. And we're suffering from it in the long run because we ultimately eat the creatures that come from the environment or the plants that come from the environment, and our health suffers due to what we've done. There's also threats to land and water. We're seeing less land and potable water each year. We're seeing soil erosion from farmland at least 10 times faster than it can be replaced by ecological processes. Irrigation is creating salinization and a lack of water for drinking. We're also seeing a pollution of fresh water from pesticides and chemicals, and a loss of agricultural land to development. This is creating some serious, serious problems that somewhere down the line we're going to pay for. Over depletion of aquifers like the Ogallala are going to have long-term impacts, especially if we're allowing populations to grow beyond the carrying capacity of the environment, and ultimately those ecological resources deplete and can no longer sustain the populations that have relied on them historically. That leads us to, of course, living beyond our means. This is a look at the global ecological footprint from 1961 and projecting out to 2050. As you can see, the dotted line, or the lighter colored line, represents what the world can sustain if we begin a rapid reduction in our consumption patterns. Right now, we're at about 1.5 worlds. That's what we need. 1.5 worlds to continue to consume the way that we're consuming. And that, in turn, by 2050, is going to be 3 complete Earths to handle our consumption patterns. And, of course, we don't have 3 Earths, folks. So something is going to give, somewhere along the line. And you can almost guarantee what gives is going to happen to poor people. This, of course, brings us to environmental justice, or an uneven distribution of environmental goods and environmental bads. When we talk about goods and bads, goods would be the unequal distribution of wealth, the consumption gap, the pollution gap, inequality in the distribution of wealth itself. So how much good you get, how much pay do you get, how much wealth do you get, how many homes do you get to live in, and how much bad do you get, or toxic waste, hazardous waste sites, poor living conditions, and very little work. That's what we're looking at when we look at environmental justice. And the idea of NIMBY, not in my backyard, is very much important in the idea of environmental justice. And the reason we say this is because wealthy people can say, I will pollute, but I don't want that in my backyard. And they could pay enough to keep themselves away from the places that trash are ultimately delivered to. Poor people, on the other hand, have to live in places where rents are low. And generally those places find themselves located by toxic waste dumps, medical facility waste dumps, things like that. Smog right next to the highway, so you have fossil fuel combustion and noise pollution, things like that. This is what we're thinking about when we're talking about environmental justice. As I mentioned, the environmental bads are hazardous and toxic waste, garbage, hazardous industrial facilities. These are typically local in their effects. That is, local communities that are least politically empowered, whether because of class, heritage, nationality, or rural location, receive the bulk of them. Power is the underlying concept at work here. And toxic wastes have an impact not only where people live, but also where they work. Those environmental goods, as I said, it talks about the unequal distribution of wealth. As of 2005, the richest fifth of the world's people command 66 times as much of the world's income as the poorest fifth. And the problem is with this is that it's looking at averages. So when we look within countries, we find an exasperated distribution of wealth, where the elite have most of the wealth and the rest of the population has very little. That distribution of resources generally can produce a consumption gap, where the average person in rich countries consumes 3 times as much grain, fish, and fresh water, 6 times as much meat, 10 times as much energy and timber, 13 times as much iron and steel, and 14 times as much paper as the average resident in a developing country. The pollution gap is also real. Wealthy of the world create far more pollution per capita than do the poor, but rich countries are also more able to externalize the local effects of the pollution they cause, as with the export of toxic wastes and dirty forms of manufacturing. The book talked about Nigeria refusing to accept toxic wastes being delivered from Italy, which ultimately had come from numerous European and U.S. organizations, and ultimately it was sent back to Italy, much to the resistance of the Italian government. Nobody wants this trash, folks. Nobody wants it.